here again, going over the post-war planning section of Section 1 of the Social Science Resource. Last time we talked about the role that World War II played in both the Soviet Union and the United States, and today we're going to talk about how them two and Britain attempted to mold the post-war world at Yalta and Potsdam, and then how they also try to mold the world through the United Nations, and then going over the structure of the United Nations. So let's begin here with, let's begin here with the Yalta Conference. Let's see where Yalta is as well. We'll get a good look at it on the map here. It is in Crimea, looks like. It is on the coast, southern coast of Crimea, as a matter of fact, which today has quite a lot of historical importance. Right, so you can see down here, it's a hangout place. It's a vacation. It's a summer home, summer vacation spot for people in the Soviet Union. Right, so we see the picture taken at the Soviet Black Sea resort town in your resource at February of 1945 with Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. This is going to be their final meeting, and it shows them all smiling and smoking. It's almost a propaganda piece, right? It's showing them all happy, and the mood's good, and the post-war world is going to be great, right, based off of this image. But as the resource talks about, this conceals quite serious tension as the war comes to a close. And then Yalta shows that these tensions would only increase as the Nazis were destroyed. As we talked about in the previous section, the defeat of the Nazis was the only thing really keeping the Soviet Union and the United States together. And as soon as that is gone and done, then there's no reason for them to continue to be allies, right? And the heart of the debate at Yalta and also at Potsdam is going to be the fate of Germany, what's going to happen to Germany politically after the war ends, and then the territories in Eastern Europe that were still occupied by the Nazis or had been liberated by the Soviets. And then they agreed that after Germany surrendered, they would split Germany into 4 occupation zones: the French, the British, the Americans, and the Soviets, each having their own. Which the Soviets actually ended up having about half of it, right? The French, British, and Americans kind of had half together. And that this area would be jointly administered through an Allied Control Council. So they would together come up with the plan for Germany, which of course is not going to happen. And then FDR and Churchill consigned or kind of left Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania to Soviet domination. They kind of worded the stuff about Poland a little weird because they talk about Poland here, right? It's kind of being consigned to Russian domination or Soviet domination, but then they don't say it's necessarily under Soviet control yet, but it will be after Potsdam. So they yielded to Stalin's insistence that territories on the Soviets' western border were within the Soviet sphere of influence, right? Which is a term actually from Chinese colonization in the 19th century, where European countries got spheres of influence in China instead of outright colonizing them, right? However, we still see that, so FDR and Churchill basically give up these countries to the Soviets, to Stalin, but at the same time, they are still publicly insisting that the Atlantic Charter still applies. The Atlantic Charter, if you recall, is all about self-determination and democracy worldwide. And we're going to see Poland here fall under Soviet control. I don't know why they brought up Poland in particular, because they're just kind of looped in with these other ones, but maybe because of Potsdam coming up next. And so we see that Stalin doesn't really plan on upholding his pledges here. Basically, he's just saying whatever they want him to say. And he believes they can implement democracy in Eastern Europe in their own way later. And the real thing here is that Stalin has a lot of leverage in this situation. He occupies all of Eastern Europe, right? And the Western powers don't have a single soldier there, right? So what are they like? If Stalin says we're going to do A, and the other allies say we're going to do B in Eastern Europe, Stalin's going to be like, okay, well, we're doing A. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to declare war on me? All right, which is absolutely not what anybody wants at this point. So we see FDR pretty criticized at home for trusting Stalin, right? It seems a pretty bad idea to trust this guy. However, we do see FDR win support at Yalta for what will become the UN, the new international body modeled on the League of Nations, which hopefully it's not super modeled on the League of Nations, because the League of Nations is not great. And then a Soviet commitment to join the war against Japan in the Pacific, which is not necessary at this point, as we'll see, but just puts a little more pressure on Japan. We do see Roosevelt, though, die 2 months later on April 12th, 1945. He was, he had polio for a large part of his life, and he was pretty old at this point. He had won 3 presidential elections, the only president to ever win 3 presidential elections, and nobody's done it since because I believe it's constitutionally not allowed. And Vice President Harry Truman assumes the presidency, and they talked about him. Let me add this here. He is a former haberdasher, which is a dealer of men's clothes. So he basically, worked in like a kind of like a men's warehouse kind of place in Missouri. So he's the accidental president. He wasn't planning on being president ever. Nobody was planning on him to be president. And he lacked a lot of the foreign policy experience that his two allies at Yalta had, right? That Churchill and Stalin had tons of foreign policy experience. And so during his first term, Truman doesn't really assert himself a whole lot. He relies heavily on the advisors that FDR had put in place. And then speaking of FDR, less than a month after his death, we see the Allies celebrating the defeat of the Nazis in early May 1945. Again, I believe it's May 9th, something like that, May 9th, 1945. And as soon as this happens, this alliance is done. Or not as soon as this happens, but it's falling apart pretty quickly. And then we get to Potsdam. And so in July of 1945, so a couple of months after the end of the Nazis, the Allied leaders, now this time with Truman instead of FDR, meet again at the Prussian Palace in Potsdam. And let's take a look at where Potsdam is. It is right here, again, a suburb of Berlin, right? So you can see right there where it is kind of in the context of Greater Europe. You can also see down here, right? This is where Yalta is. Okay. So it's a former Prussian palace. So for those of you who don't know Prussia, the Kingdom of Prussia is the bulk of modern Germany. The Prussians are the ones who unified Germany in the 1870s under Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm. They are the ones who unified Germany. They're really the big chunk of Germany. It's not all of Germany, not even close. But probably somewhere like 40 to 45% of all the land is originally part of the Prussian Empire, and of course, Prussia took that land from other previous German states. So how it goes. They meet in this palace in Potsdam, the suburb of Berlin, and again, the future of Germany and Eastern Europe is the most contentious and inflexible issue for the Allies. Neither side want to give in. However, we do see Stalin win official recognition of the Soviet puppet regime in Poland, a puppet regime being, it is, in the law books and official recognition in lots of places. It is its own independent government. However, it is recognized that, informally that the Soviets control the government in Poland. This is a huge diplomatic victory for Stalin, probably showing a little bit of Truman's inexperience in foreign policy, and also exposing that Atlantic Charter just it's dead, right? It's not a real thing at this point, and the United States isn't going to follow through with it either. So we also see Stalin signals his intention to set up a lot of satellite states in those Eastern European nations, so like satellites of the Soviet Union, not necessarily part of the Soviet Union per se, but very much directed by the Soviet Union. And then also pushed for Germany to give them billions of dollars in reparations, which, based on what happened in World War I, is a terrible idea because the reparations crumbled the German economy and kind of pushed them into the arms of the Nazis. Both of these are opposed by Truman. Whether they happen or not, I don't believe the reparations occurs in the typical sense. I think they're able to get their reparations from Eastern Germany in their own way, and the satellite states do pretty much occur for the most part. They don't reach a consensus on Germany, and so what they decide to do is give the occupying powers autonomy within the regions that they control and the right to extract reparations as they see fit within their own region. And this sets the stage for the partition of Germany along geographic, economic, and political lines. We're going to see an official East Germany, West Germany split politically, but also to this day, we see a lot of economic difference between East Germany and West Germany. West Germany is much stronger economically than East Germany. And an American diplomat was said at the time that it's better that there's a dismembered Germany in which the west of Germany can kind of be a bulwark against totalitarianism, against the Soviets, right? And instead of having a fully controlled communist Germany, right, or a fully controlled, a unified Germany that is split, right? That would also be bad. They do meet a lot more times after Potsdam, but the differing visions on what should happen with Germany led to no real outcomes occurring there, right? And the divided Germany becomes the only possible outcome. One other thing happens at Potsdam, though, is that Truman revealed to Stalin that the U.S. had successfully tested the first atomic bomb in the desert of New Mexico, probably as a way to flex their power, right? To flex the power of the United States, to say, like, hey, like, you should listen to us. Of course, chances are that Stalin already knew about it. But the weapons power, and then America's being the sole owner of that power, kind of gives America a big leg up in the early part of the Cold War, immediately after World War II. And it made an increased Truman. It made Truman more confident that he could kind of push the Soviets on some things, and like denying the two things that Stalin asked for. Sorry, I'm petting my kitty down here. She's had a rough day. And so we also see here that Stalin, as soon as he heard about this, immediately orders the acceleration of their own nuclear program. And even though Truman, kind of gave it away, he also it was also probably likely that Stalin already knew about the nuclear program due to the infiltration into America by Soviet spies. They were everywhere, And in August 1945, Truman demonstrates his nuclear weapons with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan announced their unconditional surrender within a week. We already talked about that. And so for I think this is the second possible beginning of the Cold War. The first one was when they talk about the different politicians saying that there's a split between them in 1946 or something. But here they're saying the use of atomic weapons might actually be the beginning of the Cold War, right? And we even have historians questioning why there was 2 nuclear bombs dropped. The pro-American logic, from what I've heard on this, is that basically they made a calculation of how many American troops it would take to conquer Japan. Japan had a very stout military ideology about fighting to the last man. They rarely took Japanese prisoners because they would, with things like the kamikaze being an example, right? They would fight to the bitter end. So there was this idea that Truman kind of calculated out, or at least his advisor calculated out, that it would cost less American lives, it cost a lot less lives total to bomb Japan now into submission than to go with the prolonged siege that we were going to need to do to conquer Japan. That is the pro-American side I've heard. I don't know how true that is or not. But historians really question the second bomb, especially of Nagasaki. Second bombing really didn't give the Japanese any time to respond with the surrender, because it was 2 days later. And one of the big reasons that people believe they did the second bomb is that the Soviets might have seen the first bomb as oh, well, that's the only one they have. That's it. That's all they've got. So this is an issue. So dropping the second one kind of shows that they can make more. This isn't a one-time kind of accident, right? And it tried to kind of flex on the Soviet Union. And then finally we get to the United Nations, where, as we talked about earlier, Stalin agreed to join this new international organization that was proposed by Roosevelt to help secure peace and order in the post-war world. And this was modeled on Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations. If you know anything about the League of Nations, it is incredibly weak. There is very little power. It's almost like it's kind of like the Articles of Confederation in the United States. There's just no power behind it at all. If anybody disagreed with it, they would leave it, and basically nobody was really in it. The United States wasn't in it. I think Japan leaves, Italy leaves. I don't think Russia was ever in it. So nobody was really in it to begin with. And so one of the key things they need to do is get all the major nations on board. And if they get all the major nations on board, chances are they're going to be able to get a lot of the minor nations as well. And so 2 weeks after Roosevelt's death, we see 282 delegates from 52 nations arrive in San Francisco on April 25th, 1945, to draft the charter. They debated it for 2 months, right, all the way through June, and then finally unanimously approved the final charter, making New York City the headquarters. And so there are two parts of the United Nations you need to understand. There's the General Assembly and there's the Security Council. So the General Assembly is where everybody is, and there's an international forum where each state has equal representation, equal voting power on resolutions. So that's also where a lot of the debates can occur, right? But then you have the Security Council, which has 15 total members, and 10 of those rotate. I don't know how long they rotate. But then we also have 5 permanent members: the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, France, and China. And China at this point, in 1945, is represented by nationalist Chiang Kai-shek, which they're in the middle of the, not even yet. Japan's not defeated yet, but they're about to get back into the Chinese Civil War with the communists. China being there is interesting. I don't know why exactly they were there. It's possible that the Soviets pushed for it because they thought the communists would eventually gain power in China. It's tough to tell, or at least it's tough to tell without reading more about it. But yeah, so these 5 had permanent membership on the UN Security Council. The other 10 were rotating. Let's actually take a look and see. See how long they get. 2-year terms. And so let's see who the current members are. I'm just curious. The current non-permanent members are Belgium, the Dominican Republic, Estonia, Germany, Indonesia, Niger, St. Vincent, South Africa, Tunisia, and Vietnam. That is that fascinating group. You would think that Germany, you'd think that Germany maybe would have a permanent membership at this point. And so the Security Council is the only one able to do these 3 things: enforce binding resolutions. So, they could vote resolutions in the General Assembly, but not binding resolutions, right? They could impose sanctions and order military action, right? So the Security Council really has a lot of the major political and military power of the UN. The General Assembly can vote a lot of economic sanctions, right, or economic resolutions and stuff like that. But even then, the Security Council imposes the sanctions, right? So anybody in the Security Council who doesn't want to do it, it's not going to get done. But on top of that, the 5 permanent members possessed a veto. So not even the other 10 rotating members, but only the 5 permanent members possessed a veto. And they wanted to destroy any proposal they didn't like, right? So just a straight up veto. So if the entire world wants to do something and, Great Britain doesn't want to, vetoed, right? That's a lot of power for those 5 nations. And the belief is that the only reason the Soviet Union joined in the first place is this veto power. Because it allowed him to neutralize anything he didn't like. Smaller nations feared that this veto power would basically make their power nullified and gave them no real representation, and also allowed for the great powers to kind of abuse that power, right? Especially so, if France was to invade a country and then there was sanctions imposed and military action proposed, France, boom, vetoes. Sorry, we're taking over this country whether you like it or not. And on top of that, the conflict within the Security Council could really cripple the United Nations permanently. But at any rate, the delegates hoped to live up to the Charter's preamble, which included reaffirming faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, the equal rights of men and women, and the equal rights of nations large and small, which seems laughable, both looking at it before it even gets started and, of course, after. During the Cold War, the UN is a site of dramatic protests, a lot of frenzied maneuvering between countries, and active participation in the global conflicts of the era, as we'll actually start to see pretty quickly with Korea. But that's going to do it for this section. Coming up next, we're going to get a little bit into some more meaty stuff. Oh, excuse me, don't want to put that up. where we see the Cold War officially begin, probably with Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, right? But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you